Rotarians and guests, it's a great pleasure that I get to introduce our special guest speaker for today. Darcy Lunn is from Australia, once upon a time ago. He is an honorary Paul Harris Fellow, a Rotary Peace Fellow, and has worked with Rotary on polio eradication. He's actually from Adelaide, Forbes Primary School and Sacred Heart College, he was just telling me. Darcy has many different roles, including as an educator, humanitarian and communications specialist. He's passionate about development and advocacy, and his passions have taken him to more than 90 countries around the world in the past 18 years. In 2014, Darcy founded Teaspoons of Change, small but significant ideas and actions that have a positive impact on people and the planet, which activates and aligns business, education and government with the global goals, one teaspoon at a time. Darcy is committed to see a world without extreme poverty for everyone, everywhere and forever. He's very committed and a very interesting person, and it's a great pleasure we welcome him today to speak with us. Thank you, Darcy.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that introduction, Heidi. And it's lovely to be in this building in particular. I haven't presented to this club before in this building. I was here in 2012 with Bhagwath Chandrasekhar, the Indian cricketer, when we were doing some polio advocacy back on the western side. But I'll start off here having a chat about these global goals for sustainable development. Now, you may or may not be familiar with these goals, but they were created by the United Nations and adopted by all 193 countries in 2015 at the United Nations General Assembly. Now, the thing about these goals is they're not just for the UN, they're not just for the government, but they're for all of us. No matter who we are, where we're born, what age we are, whatever work that we do, we can all feed into this framework, this global framework, to aim towards ending extreme poverty, reducing inequality and protecting our planet. But the trouble is, when I go and say this to people, they're kind of like, well, what can I do? Where do I start? And so I very much live by the ethos of Rotary, of service above self. How do we get involved in our community? How do we think globally, act locally, and know that our local actions do have global impacts? And to facilitate this, I created an organisation called Teaspoons of Change. And the idea is that our small actions collectively can and will create big change. And so those global goals are very big and lofty, but we do have to make them personal and practical. And this is the idea of Teaspoons of Change. I'd also just like to acknowledge the land on which we're gathering upon here today, the sacred turf of Adelaide Oval and the sacred lands of the Ghana people, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and future, and be wonderful custodians of this beautiful land. But for me, for the last 20 years, I've tried to be the best global citizen that I can possibly be and really refine that process and what it means to me. And my beautiful partner, Serafina, who's here, she came up with this slide which I love. So for me, it's about small teaspoons of change, the small things that we can do in our daily lives with our own personal choices, decisions and actions that feed into us being active and effective global citizens, which feed into those global goals for sustainable development. And that's as simple as it can get, and that's as effective as it can be. So if we want to achieve those global goals for sustainable development, we need to think as global citizens and act in our teaspoons of change, which of course, being Rotarians, you're highly involved with in your own lives, but also the lives of your community. So I think this is quite useful to contextualise the things that you do as Rotarians, both the polio eradication overseas and the local parks and helping out with the Hutt Street Centre and all these sorts of things. They do fit into this global context. So I think it's a really valuable thing to feed into your vocabulary, into your businesses and into your conversations with the community. So my name is Darcy Lunn with a strange spelling. That's my mother's fault, but that's okay. And I've worked with many different organisations. But I grew up in York Peninsula as a typical country kid loving cricket and footy, and I still do. And I'm the youngest in my family. I'm pretty much the mistake. I'm the youngest of 6 children and 9 years. My brother is 9 years older than me, and Mum and Dad had 5 kids in 8 years, and then, surprise, I was there. But I didn't grow up really thinking too much about the world or what my role is what my role is in the world. But I was very fortunate to then start travelling and learning from the world, and then my first interaction with Rotary was in 2012. It was the 1-year anniversary of India going without a single case of polio, which was on the 13th of January 2012. Was that 1-year anniversary. So I was working with UNICEF, and we brought out Bhagwath Chandrasekhar, the famous Indian leg spinner, who had polio when he was a child, and he had a bit of a withered right thumb, which people say that's why he was such a lethal bowler, but not such a lethal batsman. His batting average was less than the number of wickets that he took. Sorry, his total number of runs was less than wickets he took. But don't say that to Chandra, he gets very offended by that. But I had a fabulous time with this interaction with Rotary, because I'd kind of heard about Rotary, I'd kind of heard about polio, and then through this process of interacting with cricket, the two came together, and I've been working very closely with Rotary ever since. It took me to go and do advocacy across Canada. I was working with many Rotary clubs across Canada talking about polio eradication, getting presidents of clubs to write into the Prime Minister of Canada at that time. And we put all of these efforts together, and we got $240 million from the Canadian government to match with Rotarians, to match with Gates Foundation, which was a significant amount of collaboration, coordination with Rotary and many, many others. So I've been standing on the shoulders of all of you for a long time doing this advocacy work. And then I tried to run the same polio campaign in New Zealand and interacted with many Kiwi Rotarians and parliamentarians. We weren't able to raise $240 million. John Key was a bit not into polio as much as the Canadian government. But again, it was about connecting with really active people in their community, which is a fabulous network to be a part of. And then I finally had the opportunity to go and do polio work on the ground. So I went to Pakistan. And when we think of Polio Plus, this photo on the left here, for me, this is the plus side. It was a school, it was a vaccination clinic, they had clean toilets for children to use, they had clean water for the community, and so, they were eradicating polio, but they were also providing so much for their community. And the vaccinators here on the right, they go into the buses as they come into Karachi almost every minute of every single day, getting on the buses and making sure that all the children have been vaccinated for polio. So I've learnt a lot from on the ground. And working with Rotaract, Interact, RYLA, all these different segments that the Rotary offers in the world. And then I also did some work in South Sudan, a very war-torn country in 2015, but also in great need of immunisation. And again, of course, Rotary is there. They had 2 Rotary clubs in Juba, in the capital of South Sudan, very active Rotary community, and supporting, I get to see the drops that go in the children's mouths, the vaccination kits that you provide for the vaccinators. So I love being a vessel of seeing the work and the contributions that you make and how they benefit on the ground. And it was in my time in South Sudan that we were putting polio vaccines in children's mouths, but then there's a lot of conflict around. And so I thought, well, I need to understand more about conflict and peace in particular to become more effective in my advocacy, to be a better global citizen. And so then I signed up for the Rotary Peace Fellowship. I was very lucky to be accepted, and I did my Masters in Peace Studies and just finished in June in Japan. And my thesis was based around teaspoons of peace. So what are the small but significant choices, decisions and actions creating more peace in the world? So again, thank you to Rotary for giving me the opportunity to hone my skills as a global citizen and to add in this really valuable part of being a peacemaker, peacekeeper and peace creator in the world. So I've been very fortunate to work with many organisations over many years, and I now have some really lovely opportunities to be able to get my voice out into the community more, not because of doing anything special in particular, but just being passionate about what I do and trying to get the world to coordinate and collaborate and make a better world for all of us. So on Weekend Sunrise and a few other things. But these things can't happen without the support of communities and groups and getting involved as we all do at Rotary. But the 3 hardest questions I get asked is, what's your job, where do you live, and how do you get paid? And I actually don't have any easy answers for any of those questions, because my job is, I work with many different organisations. I'm usually overseas, but I'm based out of Adelaide, so I don't exactly know where I live most of the time. And how do I get paid? I don't know. I just kind of make it up as I go along. Schools and businesses sometimes pay for me to come in and give presentations. They pay for my travel. But it's not that I earn a big salary or a constant salary. It's that I often don't need much financial remuneration. So with my partner, Serafina, and I, we can do a lot with a little. And that's kind of our key to success, is not to need a lot of money, but to do a lot with it when we get a chance to make it. And I just quickly want to share with you some experiences from the Rotary Peace Fellowship. I believe you have someone who's applying at the moment, so we'll see how that goes. This was my cohort in Japan, Mendy from the Gambia, Joseph on the right here from Sierra Leone, Magda from Argentina, a wonderful mix of people, all of us working together to learn more about peace and throw it out into the world. And then connecting with local Rotarians. I was the obligatory Father Christmas. I didn't have the best gut for it, but they accepted me anyway. But an essential part of my experience on the Rotary Peace Fellowship was an AFE, Applied Field Experience. And this is where we have an opportunity to spend at least 6 weeks to go and work with peace organisations and get our fingers into the dirt of understanding what is peace, not just from the theory side, but from the practical side. And I'm in a photo here with Lema Bowie, who is a Nobel Peace Laureate from Liberia. I went and did my research in West Africa in Liberia, and there's no way I can just rock up and meet Lema with no reason. So again, it was the opportunity from Rotary to be able to meet such amazing people as Lema Bowie, who almost single-handedly created peace after the civil war in Liberia. If you ever get a chance to see a documentary called Pray the Devil Back to Hell, otherwise known as Charles Taylor, check out that documentary. Lema's story is truly amazing. So I had the opportunity to meet with Lema. I also met another Nobel Peace Laureate, José Ramos Horta, the president of Timor-Leste in East Timor. And so these opportunities kept on springing up because I was active and had programs and people like yourselves providing people like me to become more active and effective each and every day. And I learnt a lot from a post-conflict society like Liberia. I grew up in South Australia and in Adelaide in a very safe environment, so I'm not going to be an expert on peace, even if I have a master's in peace studies. The experts were the people who have lived through conflict, now on the other side, and were reflecting upon their experiences and their ideas. So a truly unique and magnificent learning process through that AFE, the Applied Field Experience from Rotary. It wasn't always easy. This is the main highway to get to the southeast of the country. There are a couple of four-wheel drives somewhere in what would be called a puddle or a swamp. But again, all these experiences go into that overall picture of learning and experiential learning. Here with José Ramos Horta, and I happened to be in Liberia while they had their elections, and they elected a former football player, George Weah, and I got to be an election observer during that time. So again, fantastic experiences that came my way from that Rotary Peace Fellowship. This was my boring title for my thesis, and that's a confusing picture. But essentially what I was trying to look at is how do we create peace from within ourselves personally, but then also collectively. And I had this wonderful kind of meeting point of post-conflict countries that don't look at the internal peace message as much, but they do look towards collective peace processes, which I thought was fascinating. And then in Western countries where I was working and in Europe, they do work on that personal peace aspect of things. So I really enjoyed that combination of how do we get inner peace and work with peace in ourselves, and then how we put it together with others. So it was a fabulous idea, and so that's why I created Teaspoons of Peace, is to try and put all of that learning into something that is useful for the general public as well. And then other projects that I've been fortunate to provide. I'm kind of going across the gamut here, but I've also built a couple of self-sufficient tiny houses through a project I created called Happy Simply, How to Live More Life with Less Stuff. And there is a self-sufficient tiny house down in Aldinga there that we created, and it cost about $1,000 because most of the materials were left over. We were all volunteers. It was built on an old caravan trailer, solar panels, rainwater tank, compost toilet, completely off the grid, and a wonderful community project of bringing people together. So when I go and talk about polio and other things, people aren't overly interested. But you start talking about tiny houses and everyone's like, oh, okay, well, how did you do that? And so then the conversation starts. So sometimes it's not always the first conversation that we can have around polio, but we can get there eventually. You know, this is why I created tiny houses, because it fits in with being a more sustainable and more effective global citizen. And just quickly on polio, so the cases in 1988, which I'm sure most of you would be familiar with, were around 350,000 cases in that 1 year. And then last year in 2017, for the whole year, for the whole world, just 22. And most people don't know this statistic outside of this room. And so this is why I created Teaspoons of Change, is that we know that one drop can and does make a difference. And so having worked in polio and these sorts of things, I know that it is possible to end extreme poverty, to reduce inequality and to protect this planet. It's not inevitable, but it is possible. And I've gained so many lessons from polio and from Rotary to be able to do that. I've also created a program called Polio Points, which runs in a number of schools, where students do good things, they earn points. So they do good things like Teaspoons of Change, they earn points, those points get matched by a donor, and those donations go to polio eradication. So at a school in Jordan, at the International Community School, the students do wonderful things, both in their community and in their school, Teaspoons of Change. Then their points are awarded by the Parents and Staff Association, and then those donations go to the district club in Jordan. So a wonderful program. I'm rarely in South Australia, but Taylor and Ben ran this for a couple of weeks when I was giving a presentation there. It's a lovely concept, so if you're a business or a school, you may want to factor this into your advocacy and work that you do. And then at the moment, I am back in South Australia, which is lovely, and I've just been cycling. I'm halfway through my bicycle trip from Adelaide to Mount Gambier and back. I've left my bike in Mount Gambier. I rode down there. My legs are twice the size they were when I left, which is lovely. But I've left my bike in Mount Gambier to come back here for a week because it's school holidays. And then on Sunday, if anyone's going to Mount Gambier on Sunday, I'd love a lift. And so I'll pick up my bike once again, and I'm giving presentations from Mount Gambier to Penola, Narracourt, Bordertown, etc., presenting at schools, Rotary clubs, community groups, having chats with councils, and talking about these global goals for sustainable development and Teaspoons of Change. It's been a fabulous trip so far. I came down through the Flurio, I met with the Rotary Club of Yankalilla and in Strathalbyn, and Rotarians in Millicent. So I've been camping and hosted by Rotarians and sharing the story of service above self and many others throughout the state. And being from country South Australia, I love being back in rural South Australia, having a chat to young students and children and talking about, well, you know, we can all make the world a wonderful place. We don't have to travel around the world. We can just get involved in our community. And yeah, there's my bike and trailer going into a headwind for 3 days. But then having the wonderful opportunity to interact with students and schools and community groups just like Rotary. And I stand by the premise, so Teaspoons of Change isn't something that everyone has to do, but it's really important to acknowledge who are good people doing good things. So yes, I want to do something, but I'm not the expert in saying, well, you should do this and you should do that. We need to know good people doing good things. And again, this is where I talk about Rotary a lot. When I'm in schools and when I'm with community groups, we have examples in our community of people who are active citizens and participate. They're not just there to put up a swing and feel good about themselves. They're doing it because they care about community and they collaborate together and they coordinate and they get things done. So it's a really good context for me to be able to use Teaspoons of Change. And then I encourage people to put together their own lists of Teaspoons of Change. These are specific to peace, but there's lots of information up on our website, so you can check that out. And here's the thing for me, is that Teaspoons of Change and for peace, even if it's just riding our bicycle, even if it's coming to a Rotary event, putting some coins in our bowl in the middle of the table, they do connect back to those global goals. Now, if everyone in the world was a Rotarian, we would have this done. We would have ended extreme poverty. We would have reduced inequality and protected our planet. So our objective and our challenge is to try and get more and more people involved, not just in Rotary, but in knowing that their small actions do count in the world. And then we have to face up to people who say, well, I can't do anything, I'm only one person, the government isn't doing this, or da-da-da-da-da. Well, there's some good statistics out there. The percentage of people living in extreme poverty, if we look at World Bank statistics, in 1981, 52% of the world lived in extreme poverty, more than half the world. And by 2015, what percentage of the world do you think is still living in extreme poverty? These are the latest statistics we have. Just have a quick guess to the person next to you. Okay, let's see. So no more bets. Now these are World Bank statistics. Statistics aren't perfect, and I'll unpack them just a little bit. But the latest statistics we have are from 2015, and we're down 9.6%. It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah. Now, China has had a big chunk of this, probably 600 million people lifted out of extreme poverty in the last 15 years. Sub-Saharan Africa, the bottom two-thirds of Africa, hasn't seen the same decrease in extreme poverty. But in general, it shows that we know what to do and we can do it. And so I'm convinced by 2030, with these United Nations Development Goals, we can end extreme poverty. It's not a matter of if we can or if we can't, we just need to work out how are we going to do it. And so this is why every little teaspoon of change, every little thing that we do has to contribute towards that. And we can create massive and wonderful results. And this formula is very simple, is that any action, even small actions, multiplied by lots and lots of people will create big change. And when I'm at primary schools, I say, how do you eat a giant cake? And they say, well, you can't because you'll get sick if you eat a whole cake yourself. That's right. So we have to break it up into small pieces, share it around, and do it all together. And so I'll just bring you back here to these global goals. If you're not familiar with them, look them up, but just know that we do have a global plan. And everything that you do that has a positive impact in the world does fit into this framework. If you're interested in bringing this into your businesses, bring it into your vocabulary, or bring it into your schools, or whatever it is, it's a very easy fit. And Serafina and I are here to try and do that with South Australia and beyond, so that we can see a better world for everyone, everywhere, and forever. And this is a young Afghan refugee girl who I met in Pakistan. I was there when she received her polio drops for the first time. And so when I do my little teaspoon of change, like riding my bike or refilling my water bottle or getting involved in my community, I do know that it is connected somewhere to someone in the world. And so that's always my motivation and why I love waking up in the morning. If you want to keep in touch, then please feel free to do so. And Heidi, I'm not sure if we do Q&A or if I've overspoken, but thank you very much for having me.
We have got time for questions. Has anybody got something to ask? Malcolm.
Well, thank you. Thank you for a wonderful example of thinking globally and acting locally. But there must be times when you get down. How do you deal with that all bit too hard feeling?
Yeah, and I felt that yesterday. We had the report that came out around climate change, and it's looking pretty dire. I mean, if we believe it or not, we're still going to go into a world that's uncertain in the future. And so you do have that moment of damn it, why can't we just get this done? But there's no point in being frustrated and annoyed. I just have to use that as more resolution to become more active and become more effective in what I do and interacting with others. So for me, I've had to learn to funnel that desperation and that sadness into resolution to connect with more people and to speak to more students and not convince them, but connect with them and see what we can do together.
Thank you, Darcy. A very, very interesting talk. I'm interested in, I think most of the room would be interested in that statistic you put up towards the end, 52% living in poverty 30 years ago down to under 10 just 2 or 3 years ago. That is remarkable. You mentioned China in the context of that. Do you know what the relative change is in the Western world as against the developing world? And I don't want to get political about it, but it makes me wonder the degree of change in the totalitarian regimes as against the democracies.
Yeah, that's a great question. I spent quite a bit of time in China, and I was there recently for a month, and I had a fascinating conversation which I really don't know the answer to. But we wonder, if you compare China and India, say back in the 60s, India being a new democracy, China really heading into to its communist days, the effect of the one-child policy. And there's a lot of studies going on around that. I need to do a lot more reading on it. But it was just an interesting thing to hear. You know, what impact did that have? And what impact does a government who can mandate things? And I'll give you a good example in Rwanda. President Kagame. So overnight he could ban plastic bags, and they don't have plastic bags in Rwanda from 2014. And so when you do have those governments, if they make good choices, decisions and actions, they can have very big and immediate impacts. But at what price for democracy as well? So I think it's more of a conversation continuation. But that drop in extreme poverty, governance is a part of it, but so is our trade policies, the way that we deal with Australian aid and other foreign aids, the way that we can coordinate so that we're ensuring that we're paying fair money for resources. These sorts of things, they're all a part of a big picture, and there's never going to be a silver bullet. But it's a great question, and I think it's an ongoing conversation.
Darcy, a fantastic speech and very motivating. My question is, I'm trying to understand what we mean by extreme poverty. Here in Australia, we have social welfare agencies who won't accept second-hand clothing, second-hand toys. It all has to be new. We have housing agencies that tell us that we really need to provide similar standards of housing to those in need rather than makeshift micro-housing and so on. So I'm conflicted in all of this. Maybe you can give us some insights as to how we might actually resolve it. Thank you.
Sure. So the definition of extreme poverty, according to the World Bank, is what you can buy in the United States for $1.90 or less per day. So that's the dry definition. So technically, if you live on $1.91, you're not considered to live in extreme poverty. But you know, obviously, with this, for statistics, they have to put a line in the sand. So that's where those statistics come from. Then when we're talking about relative poverty, it's a very difficult question. So when I come from South Sudan and I come to here and people are talking about poverty, I can't really comprehend the poverty here compared to what I've just been to. But it is very real for those people here. So the thing that I've learned isn't so much the statistics or the outcomes, the best outcomes. For me, what I find is two things in particular is humility and humanity. So how do we go in not saying that we have the answers, but ready to listen and learn and connect with people? And I think that's the approach that works best, regardless of poverty and where it is. It could be Indigenous communities, it could be here in South Australia, it could be all over the world. And so what I've found in my experience is that listening and learning and connecting with people to then make solutions together that can be more sustainable is a far better approach than just saying, right, we've got this. The trouble is that we want to have solutions that we can call this, that or the other. And I think when we try and say that we have the answer to a question, I'm very wary of that. And in my experience, I love approaches that do have that sense of humility and humanity to connect with people. So I don't think that completely answers your question, but that's the approach that I've gleaned over my experiences in working in poverty.
Darcy, thank you for that wonderful presentation. The other thing that I think that we need to confront is the reality of the increasing world population. And somehow or other, we do need to get on with family planning and teaching both men and women, and probably especially the women, because I don't know that men really are going to ever listen. But especially women, about what to do about contraception. And I know it's not an easy solution, but somehow or other things are going to have to happen. What do you say to that?
Yeah. So there's one. The best contraception in the world is to educate girls, both statistically and we know in our communities. Because when we educate girls, they go through school, they become educated, they get married later in life. They have less children. The children they have are better looked after with nutrition and stuff because men generally don't play that role in some countries. And then they go on to have careers of their own and they contribute back more to the community than males do statistically on a per capita basis. So we need to get girls educated. Then the other thing about world population isn't just the number but is the consumption. So one child born here in Australia would be the equivalent of at least 10 or more children in a place like Ethiopia. So it's not always about absolute numbers, it's the amount of resources that are going to be used for that one child. So I think all of those things have to go into that conversation. But if we get girls educated, make sure that they can go through school, and particularly high school and further education if they want, that's a game changer. And that's been proven in a place like Thailand, where in the late 60s, on average, women were having 6.2 children per mother, and it's now 1.8 children per mother. And a lot of that is basically because girls had access to free education.